China just suffered its biggest defeat, and the Philippines may be gone forever. The battle for control in the South China Sea has reached a turning point, and the results shocked the entire world for years. China has been building artificial islands, arming them with missiles and warplanes, and claiming waters that do not belong to them. But when Beijing thought it could push the Philippines aside and dominate the Pacific, the response changed everything. This was not just a clash of two nations. It became a showdown that drew in allies, exposed China's weaknesses, and reshaped the balance of power in Asia. The Philippines, long underestimated, as a small nation with a weaker military, suddenly became the center of global attention for decades. China believed it could intimidate the Philippines using Coast Guard ships, militia vessels, and military drills to slowly take control of reefs and shoals. But what China did not expect was the resilience of the Filipino people and the powerful alliances that stood behind them. Every time Chinese vessels harassed fishermen, every time they blocked supply boats, every time they tried to choke the Philippines into silence, the resistance only grew stronger. China wanted to show dominance, but instead it exposed its limits. The turning point came when a direct confrontation unfolded in the West Philippine Sea. Chinese ships tried to cut off Philippine resupply missions to disputed outposts, expecting Manila to back down. But this time, cameras captured everything. The world saw unarmed Filipino sailors standing face-to-face with armed Chinese Coast Guard ships, refusing to move. The images spread across the internet, sparking outrage and sympathy globally, instead of bowing down. The Philippines gained international support almost overnight. This became China's biggest defeat, not because of a single battle, but because it lost the narrative. It lost the image of strength. It had worked so hard to build, and it lost the ability to bully a smaller neighbor without consequences. Soon after allies rushed in, the United States invoked its defense treaty. Japan offered military aid. Australia joined joint patrols, and European powers, like France and the UK, sailed their warships through the South China Sea, signaling that Beijing would not be allowed to dominate freely. Even India supplied missiles to Manila, adding another layer of pressure on China. What was once seen as an isolated dispute now turned into a global stand against Beijing's expansion. This was not the outcome China wanted for years. Beijing had been testing the waters, pushing little by little, taking reefs and building bases without triggering a unified response. But the attempt to break the Philippines backfired. It united nations across the world in a way China never expected. The Philippines itself transformed. What was once called the weak link in Asia's defenses became a symbol of resistance. Fishermen, once afraid to sail, now became icons of bravery. Soldiers stationed on rusting ships turned into national heroes, and the public demanded stronger defense investments. Manila, once divided, now stood together. The more China pushed, the stronger the Filipino resolve became for Beijing. This was the worst kind of defeat, not just military, but political and psychological. The South China Sea had been China's grand project, a way to show the world that its rise was unstoppable. But the failure to subdue the Philippines proved that power has limits. No matter how many ships or missiles you have, if you cannot bend your neighbor, you cannot claim true dominance. The Philippines may not have destroyed China militarily, but it destroyed the myth of invincibility that Beijing had been projecting for decades. And once that myth was shattered, the consequences rippled across the globe. Southeast Asian nations, once fearful of angering Beijing, began strengthening ties with the US and each other. Vietnam became bolder. Malaysia and Indonesia spoke louder against China. Even Taiwan felt encouraged, knowing that resistance was possible. In the West, nations watched carefully, realizing that China could be resisted if united. The shockwaves also reached within China itself. The leadership in Beijing had promised its people endless strength, endless victories. But what they saw was a small nation refusing to bow down. Propaganda videos could not erase the footage of Philippine defiance or the reality of a global backlash. Cracks appeared in the carefully crafted image of inevitable Chinese dominance, and that was a humiliation the government never wanted to face. China had built bases at enormous cost, poured billions into artificial islands, and flexed its navy again and again. But at the end of it all, the Philippines was still standing unbroken and backed by the world Beijing had gambled and it had lost forever. This is why the story of the Philippines is so important. It is not just about reefs, rocks, and fishing rights. It is about the limits of power. It is about the courage of a smaller nation standing up against a giant and showing the world that unity and resilience can overcome intimidation. China's biggest defeat was not on a battlefield with bombs and bullets. It was in the court of global opinion. It was in the headlines shared across continents. It was in the minds of ordinary people watching. The underdog refused to surrender. The Philippines is gone forever, not in the sense of destruction, but in the sense that the old Philippines, the weak and divided nation, Beijing thought it could dominate, has disappeared forever. It has been replaced by a stronger, more confident nation, backed by allies and fueled by pride. The Philippines of today is not the Philippines. China once thought it could bully the Philippines of today has become the symbol of defiance in Asia, and that is something Beijing cannot erase. History will remember this moment as the time when China's unstoppable rise hit a wall. A wall. It never expected the small but unbreakable spirit of the Philippines in the years to come. Textbooks will not only talk about artificial islands and naval patrols, they will talk about how one of the smallest countries stood up and exposed the limits of a giant. They will talk about how China suffered its biggest defeat, not because of weapons, but because it underestimated the will of a people. They will talk about how the Philippines was gone forever from the shadow of fear and born again as a nation that changed the balance of power in Asia, and as the waves of the South China Sea continue to crash, and the world continues to watch, one truth remains. The giant may roar, the giant may threaten, but it will always remember that in the waters of the Philippines, it met its greatest humiliation and lost forever.